Hi, I'm Peggy Fair, and thanks for joining us on the Understand Photography Show, where we talk about travel, nature, and fine art photography. Today, we're going to be talking about long exposures and using those really, really strong neutral density filters with Lewis Kemper. So we're lucky to get Lewis here, so stay tuned. The Understand Photography Show is first a podcast, so if you're watching us on YouTube or on Facebook and there are no visuals, that's why. We have a much bigger audience as a podcast. It is an hour-long show, so it's kind of hard to sit for an hour and watch. So most people listen to us in the car. So we hope you do too. And we also hope that you'll put a review on iTunes for us, because that helps us come up in the search engines better than anything. If you're local here, we have the 4 Weeks Proficiency in Photography course starting up in February. If you're not local, we have the 4 Weeks to Proficiency in Photography course interactive online starting up in February. You can go onto our website at understandphotography.com to get the exact dates and more information. But it's a 4-week kind of intensive class to really get a good foundation in photography. You're going to learn how to shoot in manual in the very first class. There's no Aperture Priority in this class. You can use it after you finish, but not during. Anyway, the second class is going to be all about composition and compositional rules. Third class is lighting, including flash photography and how to balance your background with your foreground, that type of stuff. And the last class, I just call it the techie stuff, because we're going to go into metering modes and drive modes and focus modes and white balance and things like that. Our motto at Understand Photography is we simplify the technical. So if you're the kind of person who needs to be really kind of stepped through things little by little, then you will really like our classes, because I'm not a technical person. It took me a long time to learn this stuff, but now I've been teaching this course for 10 years. We kind of have it down, so we have a lot of success stories. We also have a Tuscany trip. We've sold out of most of our workshops and our trips, but we do have openings for our Tuscany trip. It's in October of 2020. So again, understandphotography.com, check it out. So you probably already know who Lewis Kemper is, but just in case, I will give you a little bio on him. He is a Tamron ambassador, which is a big honor. You have to be a really good photographer, and you have to be like an overachiever to get that status. He was also a Canon Explorer of Light for 10 years, which again, same thing. You have to be a super overachiever. His photography is in, really renowned museums, galleries all over the country. He's written books and he's in magazines, and he actually worked with Ansel Adams, and you actually worked at his gallery, right?
Yes, in Yosemite. Thank you.
So
Thank you very much.
How long did you work in Ansel Adams' gallery? That's exciting.
I worked from basically the fall of '78 through summer of '80, and then back again in '84 for a little while. Yeah, that was a pretty exciting time.
Wow.
We could spend the whole time talking about the stories from then if you wanted.
Oh my gosh.
So I've got lots of great stories and the photographers that I got to meet, and it was a pretty wonderful time.
How'd you get that gig?
Well, it was interesting. I basically, I studied, I'm one of the few photographers I know who actually went to college and studied photography. And I have a degree in fine art photography from the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. And after school, I just kind of bought a van and started traveling, and I was running out of money up in Seattle, and I was at a friend's house. I had $40 left to my name, and I called down to Yosemite National Park and just said, "Are you hiring?" And I didn't even ask them for what or whatever, and they said yes, and I drove down to Yosemite, and I got a job washing dishes at the Ahwahnee Hotel. So my dad told all his friends that Lewis was in California in the ceramics.
Ceramics.
So, yeah. But while I was working at the concession, which was the main park concession at the time as a dishwasher, I learned that the photographer at the Ansel Adams Gallery, which was a separate concession, had left recently. Okay. So I went over and applied for the job as photographer at the Ansel Adams Gallery, and after about being in the park washing dishes for about a month, I got the job at the Ansel Adams Gallery.
So you were a photographer there?
Yeah, so I ran they have a photo department, basically film cameras. They would sell camera stuff and lots of film and, things that the tourists would need, filters and that kind of thing. So I was in charge of that and ordering all the materials and whatever. And then, Ansel would have his fine prints that we would sell as fine prints, and then he had his special edition prints that hung on the back wall that we sold by the gazillions. They were like $60 a piece for these 8x10s that were printed by Alan Ross. And so I was in charge of making that inventory and all that kind of stuff. And then when Ansel held his workshops, I was in charge of ordering all the materials for the workshops and making sure everybody had what they needed and all that kind of stuff. And for me, Ansel's workshops were like my college history, history photography book came live. All the people that I studied in college were there. And it was just totally incredible. So I got to meet, all my idols, basically. Wow. So it was pretty wonderful. Yeah.
That is awesome. What a great story.
Yeah, 23 years old. And, when I was in high school, I had a class that half the year was photography and half the year was astronomy. And my teacher introduced us to Ansel Adams and Ernst Haas. And so I'm working at the Ansel Adams Gallery, and I can't remember if it was the first year or the second year that I was there, that Ernst Haas was one of the speakers. So it was like, to me, it was wonderful.
What an opportunity, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
And you were smart enough to take it.
Oh, yeah.
And you know what I like about that story more than anything, even though is that you graduated from college and became a dishwasher.
Right.
That's something that I think a lot of people don't realize. Sometimes you just have to make sacrifices in life.
I wanted to be in Yosemite and photographing.
I've never been there.
Oh, really?
Everybody goes there. I haven't been there yet.
Oh, it's pretty special.
I bet. I can't even imagine. I've seen a million pictures, and they're all pretty amazing.
Yeah, and the best part about being the dishwasher was I basically worked nights, so I had all my days free to photograph. And then when I had my 2 days off, it was really like having 3 days off because I didn't have to be there till like 6 or 7 o'clock at night. So it was pretty cool.
That's awesome. That's great, though. I mean, that's a good story because you followed your passion, but in the meantime, you have to have a job.
Right.
Don't live off your parents' kids. All right, so today, I know you know pretty much everything there is about photography, probably. So maybe, but you don't come this way very often, do you? Or do you?
Not. I come to the other side of Florida often.
You do.
Yeah.
You
I do stuff for the Palm Beach Photographic
Beach.
Center. Yeah.
Okay.
I've been for 25 or 26 years. Yeah.
So
I've been doing that. Once or twice a year sometimes.
We'll
Yeah.
have to remember that, Heather, and bring him back.
Yeah.
Because he knows everything. So let's talk about neutral density filters.
Okay.
All right, so if someone has no idea what that is, can you explain?
So a neutral density filter is a filter kind of like your sunglasses, only it's a neutral gray, so it doesn't affect the colors of your image, and it darkens down and lets less light come into your camera so that you can take longer exposures.
Okay, and you just put it on in front of your lens.
Yeah, like any other filter. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what type of different types of filter? ND is neutral density.
Right.
ND filters are there or do you use?
Well, there's a wide variety. So you can get filters anywhere, from one stop, 2 stop, 3 stop. I shoot most prominently with a 15 stop filter or a variable filter, which goes from basically, I can't remember if it's 1 or 2 stops of mine up to 7 stops of light change. And that's basically, I have a 10 stop, but I rarely use that one. Personally.
Let me ask you about the variable, because I bought a variable. It was about $80, and it was horrible.
Right. Yes. So the variable
It made like an X in the middle of the picture.
Yes, and that's when you turn it to the maximum, and it's going to make that X. There's only one filter, and the one that I'm using now doesn't make the X because it's what's it called? Oh, I'll think of it in a moment. What their name of it is, but it basically stops you from turning to the danger zone. All the filters, basically a variable neutral is almost like 2 polarizers, and when you get to that danger zone, you've crossed polarized, and that gives you the X. So the filter that I'm using, and like I said, I'm totally drawing a blank on its name,
but during the show, we'll put it in the show notes.
Okay, I'll come up with it, I'm sure. And it has a stop, so you can only turn so far. And then it won't let you get that dangerous X. Because the weird part about the X is you don't usually see it looking through the camera. And even on the back, when you shoot the picture on the LCD, or looking on the LCD, you don't see it until you bring the image up. And then it shows up.
That's exactly what happens.
Yes. Yeah. And variables, you also have to be all neutral density filters, to make sure they're really neutral and not introducing a color cast. So some of the less expensive filters tend to have a color cast to them as opposed to being really neutral that don't affect the color.
How do you know? Because I bought that one. I mean, it's
Yeah.
been a long time,
Right.
probably 10 years ago, but I still have it. It's just
Yeah.
sitting there.
Right.
But it's purple.
Yeah.
How do I know? How do you know when you order?
You really don't unless you look at reviews and read reviews of what people say about their filters. The good thing with digital is, you could do a white balance with that filter on and neutralize that cast. So before you take the picture. Yeah, so just like you would shoot a normal white balance, you put it on and you do a custom white balance with the filter on and it'll neutralize that. Whereas with film, you were stuck with that color. Yeah.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
So if you do, how much would a variable cost in general?
Good variables, I'd say anywhere from $150 to $250, and if you go to some of the bigger brand names, they can even be $300-$400.
Okay. So if you're buying the $81 one like I did, you're probably doomed.
Yeah, I mean the one, like I said, I can't remember its name right now, but it was about 120.
Okay.
It wasn't too super expensive, and that's the one that has the stop on it. And if I don't remember it by the end, I'll get back to you.
Okay.
I'm trying to picture what the lens. It actually has a lens cap that it comes with what it says. But
that's what I like. Stuff that dummy proofs.
Yeah. Right. Oh yeah. Because it just stops you. With a variable, they'll say 9 stops, but at that 9th stop, the 8th to 9th stop is when you're, it's useless.
It's useless. Yeah.
So mine, it tells you it's 7 because the last 2 it's really not letting you use.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've got the variable filter. That's your lesser filter, basically.
Right, and that
one.
less stops, and I use that more for slowing down water and shooting, either the ocean waves coming in and want to get them soft, or flowing water that you want to soften down if it's bright in the middle of the day. And that's what those filters are used for the most with me. If I wanted to slow down motion of runners, or sometimes I do this thing over in St. Augustine, and we do horses on the beach. And if you do the evening one, it's bright and sunny when you first start. And if you wanted to get slow motion of the horses, then you would have to use like the variable neutral density filter to slow that down. So those are the instances where I personally would use, something like that. But what I really like to do is use the strong filter.
The 15 stop.
Yeah.
Now, when they say 15 stop, what does that mean?
It's letting in 15 stops less light than what you see. So when you put that filter on the front of your camera and look through, you can't see out. It's
you can't see it all.
You can't see it all. No, so it's like totally black.
So walk us through how do you use that thing?
So the way I use it is when I'm doing these exposures, the whole purpose for me for doing this is I'm trying to photograph something that we can't see. So to me, it's almost like taking pictures of ghosts. I'm taking a picture of something that you really visually can't see, and that's the motion and time, basically. So I'm trying to capture time in a, instant, basically. We're used to our pictures being fractions of a second and freezing something, and when you shoot for 4 minutes, everything changes. Clouds, instead of looking like clouds, become streaks. If the wind's blowing trees, they just become a pattern, and or the grass is in the foreground and things. So it changes, and you're photographing something that you visually, with your head, never see. So the cool part about it, it's like if you ever worked in a dark room, when you first put that first print in the tray and, you're shaking that tray and that first thing pops up and you get so excited because you have no idea what it's going to look like. Well, that's what using the neutral density filters does for me, because not until I hit that LCD and look at it after sitting there for 4 minutes or 8 minutes or whatever do I have any idea what the picture is going to look like. So it's like magic every time. So sometimes it's good magic, sometimes it's bad magic. But,
that's the problem.
Right.
You have to have a lot of patience.
Yeah, you do.
Because you could take an 8-minute exposure and have a terrible picture, right?
Right. Or sometimes, like, my favorite thing is the streaking clouds. And I've sat there before for 4 minutes, and looking at the clouds, and then you look at it and it's like, it looks like you took a 60th of a second, there's like no movement. And it's like, when that happens, that it's just time to go home or do something else, because it's not going to change. It's not going to get windier up there. So, yeah, but, you never know until you get it. And then sometimes it's great and sometimes it's not as exciting, but it's always fun.
So you would use these 15 stop filters for making the clouds streaky, making the water like mush.
Yeah.
Not just soft.
Yeah, it
would be mush.
Right, yeah, right. Totally eliminate waves and motion and whatever.
What else would you use it for besides that?
Those are mostly that's about it for me, yeah. Those are the strong things, yeah.
Those are two big things.
Right. Right. So a 15-stop filter takes a 1/125th of a second shutter speed and turns that into like 4.5 minutes.
And how would somebody figure that out?
Right.
I mean,
so
you can't do any math.
Right. Well, see
I would
that.
have to like get a paper.
Right. Well, you know, there's this
30 minutes, I'll
chart you
figure
can
it out.
get, but see, so the only one I keep in my head is 1/125th of a second. It correlates to 4.5
Oh,
minutes.
so you just memorized that.
Right. So that's
How I
the only
learned
thing.
photography, by the way.
Right. So that's
I
the only.
didn't understand it. So
Right.
I just memorize settings.
Yeah. So I memorized that one. So if I look at a 4-minute exposure and think, well, clouds didn't move as much as I want, I should do 8 minutes. Well, I know at 1/125th it was 4 minutes. So if I take it to a 60th of a second, it's going to become 8 minutes.
Okay.
You know, one stop down is another stop, you know,
How
longer.
did you figure it out in the first place?
Charts.
Charts.
Yeah, or you can get apps on your phone that figure it out and that kind of
Okay.
thing.
Do you know any of the
So,
apps, or you just?
oh, well, PhotoPills has it in there, and the Photographer's Infurious has a neutral density chart, I think, in theirs as well.
Okay.
And then there's some standalones, I think, that'll
That
do
you
that
just go
for
on
you.
the internet and say,
Yeah, long exposure apps or neutral density filter apps or something of
Okay.
that sort.
okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because
So the real trick is, you know, figuring it out ahead of time, because once you put the filter on, you're basically, it's too late. So you have to compose. So my process for doing this is set the camera up. You have to obviously be on a tripod and, you know, compose my picture first. And then I use Aperture Priority, and I'm going to spin the aperture until I get 1/125th of a second.
okay.
So then what I do is look at the camera and say, okay, it's f16 now, or f11, whatever it turns out to be, and whatever ISO I'm at. So then I know when I go to manual, I need to be at that ISO and that aperture, and then I can just go to bulb and set my bulb timer for 4.5 minutes.
Okay, hold on. Let me just repeat that. 'Cause I always shoot in manual, so whenever you
Right,
put-
so-
But the aperture priority is just to get your original setting.
Right, just to
So-
get my aperture and ISO.
So with aperture priority, you already know you're going to be at f16 or f11, is what you're saying?
No, I want 1/125th of a second,
Oh,
so
you
I just
start-
spin the aperture until I see 1/125th of a second. And that's the aperture I'm going to use.
Okay.
And if it turns out that's not like enough for the depth of field that I want, then I'm going to have to change my ISO.
And your ISO is almost always at, you start?
I start at I'm a Nikon shooter, so 64 is the base ISO on my camera.
Okay,
So when I'm doing the long exposures, I try to do them at the base ISO.
because that's the highest quality.
Right,
Okay.
right.
Okay,
But there are times if I, need a, more depth of field, like f16, then I may have to go up in ISO to get that same
how
equivalent.
do you know you need more depth of field? Do you not?
Just from the original
Take a
picture, if I have a strong foreground and I'm close,
So you take a picture at 1/25th of a second?
I usually do, yeah. And I look at that picture and I just see if I have everything I want in the depth of field, and
Okay, that makes sense.
all that looks good.
And then you just hope the clouds will come out cooler, the water, or whatever.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
So you put it on, focus the picture, turn off all your buttons so you don't hit focus once the filter's on. So I use back button focus. So once I put the filter in and use the timer, I don't have to worry about the focus changing. So I'll get it all set up, and figure out what that shutter was. And then I have, one of the remote timers, intervalometer with the bulb timer setting on it. Or when I was shooting with the Canon 5D4, it had the built-in bulb timer in it.
So you can just say 4.5.
Yeah, so I can just set that to
You don't have
4.5
sit there
minutes and
with
don't
the
have to sit there with.
stopwatch.
Right, so I set 4.5 minutes on my intervalometer timer, so I just have to push once, and then it just goes. And then during that 4.5 minutes, you pull out your phone, you check your email, you
Yeah,
read the newspaper, or you do whatever you do. 'Cause,
I just got some filters, a year ago, I guess.
Uh-huh.
I've only used them a few times because, boy, you know what? I don't have patience.
right.
I get so bored. I'm bored.
Well, the worst part is like sunset, because you have time for 2 pictures usually, and that's it.
Yeah.
Because in that 8-minute time span,
just
it's gone. The light's done by then. So.
Now, does a neutral density filter bring out better colors, or does it do nothing to the
It really should do nothing to the color.
Okay.
Right.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
All right, so let's walk this through again, because it's pretty technical for people who, let's say I have people who are beginners in the
Right.
audience.
Right.
it's not really that technical, but it is when you start putting it all together.
Yeah, and
basically you're finding your exposure. The way you do it is in the easy way.
Right, that's
an aperture priority first.
Right.
Kind of cheating,
yeah,
basically.
Right.
Because you already know you want 125.
Yeah, that's where I always start with that 4-minute exposure, and then I'll look at the picture and see, were the clouds long enough? Was it too long? And then my second exposure, I can either cut it in half or double it if I want, by going one stop, open or one stop closed.
But if you're new at it, it's probably a good idea to have a chart.
Yeah. Yeah, I carried the chart in the beginning, and then I just realized it was easier to start at one place and just remembering. I just have to remember one thing,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that.
Because, I show people the chart and they go, how can I remember all this? It's like, you don't have to remember it all. You just have to remember one.
Yeah, that is great. So the aperture priority at 125, and then you just spin it until you get the right aperture.
Yeah.
Hopefully it will be something. Most of the time you want a great depth of field.
Yeah, because I'm doing landscape, so most of the time I want a fair amount of depth of field. So I'm always going to be, between 8 and 16.
So if it comes up to 2.8, you're going to up.
Yeah, I'm going to up my ISO. Yeah, just because it was too dark out or something to do what I wanted. Yeah.
Now, okay, that's a good question.
Yeah, like sunset time. When I'm doing it at sunset, if I'm doing it at sunset, then I'm definitely going to up my ISO. And I'll usually start maybe around 400 ISO to make sure I can get up around 11 or 16 with the aperture.
Okay, so what would be when's the main time you do these type of things? Do you do them at night, middle of the day, sunset?
More middle of the day, actually, than anything.
Middle of the day.
Because that's when you get, the really good clouds and the movement.
When we tell people, don't shoot in the middle of the day.
Right, it gives you something to do, too. Yeah. Of course, the bad part about it is that was the time photographers could sleep. And now I can't sleep because I can still take pictures in the middle of the day. So as a nature photographer, I was always up before sunrise to be out to photograph. And you would either scout or nap in the middle of the day, and then you'd be out at sunset. And then once digital came along and nighttime photography became part of the equation, you were up all night. So the middle of the day was the really only downtime. And now with the neutral density filters, that's gone away.
There's no sleep.
Right. So so I have to kind of pick, what am I going to do today? Because you can't do it all.
Oh my gosh.
But so most of the time I do in the middle of the day with the longer exposures. And then at sunset, like I said, you usually get, 1 or 2 shots because it's just going to get dark on you too quickly. So I was a Canon shooter for a really long time, and because of doing the long exposures with the neutral density filters is the reason I switched. Because with my Canon cameras, when I would expose for 4 minutes in temperatures 70 degrees or higher, it looked like my shadow areas were just full of Christmas tree lights. I had red, green, and blue dots by the thousands in the shadow areas. And with noise reduction, you can reduce the color or whatever, but you can never clear all the dots.
And what were those dots from?
It's hot pixel noise, basically, if the sensor heating up. So by being open for a long time, the Canon sensors were real susceptible to being hot. And when people test cameras, nobody ever tests for that. They'll talk about the high ISO noise and all this other stuff. So you can read all you want and search whatever, and you'll never find anybody mentioning what happens when you expose for 4 minutes or 8 minutes or whatever when it's warm out. When it was cold, it was not an issue with the Canon cameras, but once it got warm out, it became an issue. So at sunset, I would have to actually have 2 camera bodies with me, and I'd take one picture and use the long exposure noise reduction, take the lens off, put that camera away, stick on another one to get my second picture. And if you use the long exposure noise reduction on the Canon cameras, you clear up 98% of the dot problem. But again, if you're taking a 4-minute exposure, it takes 4 minutes to process when you use the long exposure noise reduction, or if you did an 8-minute, it would take 8 minutes. So in the middle of the day, that's not that big of a deal, except that you have to wait another 4 minutes, so it's 8 minutes before you even get to look at your picture. But in the middle of the day, if you're doing streaking clouds, you can shoot multiple exposures and multiple images, but if you try to do that at sunset, it's not right. You're doomed.
One picture.
You're doomed. So I decided to start testing cameras and see if anybody was better. And I have a good friend, and I don't know if you've ever had Deb Sandage on the show or not. Not yet. Okay.
Right,
I was gonna say, right. She's right. She's right up the street. Yeah. And she shoots with the Nikon and does long exposures. So I called her up and I said, do me a favor, just put your lens cap on and shoot a 4-minute exposure to me and send me the raw file. And it was so much nicer than the raw file I was getting from my Canon cameras. So the problem was, I had all this Canon gear. So at that time, the other and Sony makes the sensors for the Nikon cameras.
Okay.
So I decided, well, test a Sony camera and see what it does, because the best scenario for me would have been if the Sony camera was as good, then I could have gotten the adapter, kept all my Canon lenses, and still shot the Sony, rangefinder camera, or the mirrorless camera, I mean, and I wouldn't have had to switch everything over. So I had a friend who had, at that time, it was the Sony AR7 III, was the newer one. They just came out with the 4, but it was a 3. And I met him on a day when it was over 100 degrees out. And we sat and shot side by side 4-minute exposures. And his had a whole lot less than the Canon did, but it still had a fair amount of hot pixels. And then I had a friend who had the Nikon D850, and I went over to her house and took a picture in her backyard with my Canon, and the Nikon was like totally clean.
No kidding. And this was all pretty recent.
Yeah, so this was all like a year and a half ago or so.
So it's not like they could have caught up technically. Still there. It's
right.
No problem.
So I haven't gotten to test the new Sony AR7 IV because it's not 100 degrees anywhere yet. So I have to wait till the summertime to test that and see if it's how it's doing.
Did you write a blog about that by chance?
Yeah, I think I did on my
that would be interesting.
On my website, I have a blog about shooting my test and the pictures. So, so I was kind of happy and sad at the same time. I found a camera, so I had to get rid of everything I had and start all over. And
that would have to be so expensive.
Well, expensive, and also there's, unfortunately, in my mind, I wasn't smart enough to think about all the other things I should be looking at in the camera, because there's a lot of stuff in the Nikon camera that I absolutely hate, but the sensor and the pictures I love. So I kind of have a real love-hate relationship now with my camera, because I just think that the designers and the ergonomics of the Nikon camera are far inferior to what I had in the Canon camera. And especially
the main thing, because I teach a lot of beginners, the Canons are easier to use.
Yeah, I think the menus.
The menus.
The menus to me are more logical than they are in the Nikon, and you can sort of get used to the menu thing. I mean, I still not quite all the way, but the one that kills me the most is I do a lot of wildlife photography. So I have one for the landscape and all. I love the Nikon camera. For the wildlife stuff, I hate the Nikon camera. And the big thing for me is I shoot a lot on manual like you do, but I used auto ISO a lot with the wildlife situation. Right. And so when you do on the Canon camera exposure compensation, you set it to -2, you look through the viewfinder and it shows you you're at -2. So if you're moving to a different situation, you just know to change your exposure compensation. The Nikon camera, when you set it on manual and do auto ISO and set it to -2, you look in the viewfinder and your light meter shows you you're at 0. Okay?
Yeah, that's confusing.
And unless you hit a button, the exposure compensation button on the top, there's a little teeny plus minus symbol that you're supposed to be able to see, but the light meter shows you're at 0. So you pick up your camera an hour later or whatever, and you're shooting at -2, and you have no idea because you look at it, and all you look at is the light meter, and it's telling you you're at 0, and then you're shooting this great sequence of wildlife stuff, and it's 2 stops underexposed or whatever. So that drives me up a wall. And to the Nikon people, that's normal. I mean, I've talked to the tech people, it's like, isn't my light meter supposed to tell me what my exposure is? And they say, no, the light meter's telling you exactly what it's supposed to. And it's like, it's not telling me what my exposure is. I mean, I'm shooting -2 and it's telling me I'm shooting 0. And they just don't get it.
Yeah.
And
the thing that I struggled when I started teaching with the Nikons is that because the light meter, if you're in manual on a Canon, if you're shooting 2 stops under your meters, right, just like you said. But on Nikon, I'd have everybody put their camera in manual, and I make them practice, for the hands-on classes. What are your settings? And they'll say like, everybody will say 200th of a second, and then there'll be one guy who will say, I got a 1 with quotation marks, and I'm like, what?
Yeah.
And because he's got his exposure compensation, but They don't know that they have their exposure compensation on. I didn't know that at first. I was like, what is going on with these Nikons?
Yeah.
It happens so often that I finally know now to look on the Nikons to see their exposure compensation, because it's that button is so easy to hit by accident.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
well, mine's a little tougher, but right.
The beginners, you know, they're coming with the entry level, and it's easy to make that mistake. And Nikon doesn't show you on the light meter, as you said, which is really maddening. I agree with that.
And the other really dumb design thing, you know, with my Canon, like, I think the 5D Mark IV was totally the best designed camera I ever used, better than the 1D series and stuff. Because for the focus, you know, you have your toggle switch to move your points around, and that was easy. And then there was another button up there where I could just cycle through the number of points. You know, I could go from the 4 to the 1 to the whatever, just hitting those. So just going like this without ever moving my eye away from the camera, I could do that. On the Nikon, if you want to change the number of points, I have to let go of the lens, push in the little button on the side, and spin the wheel. Well, if you're holding, you know, I mean, my Tamron 150 to 600, if I let go of the lens, I'm not looking at my, you know, I can't take a picture and do that all at the same time.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, the Canon, I could just look through and switch it around and shoot.
I never like to take my camera down off my eyeball.
Right. Oh, yeah, exactly.
I started as a wedding photographer, and I learned that from Bambi Cantrell. Do you know her?
Yes.
It's like, where does a wedding photographer hold their camera?
Right to your eye. Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah.
And I always remembered that, and same thing, I started shooting wildlife as I go.
Right.
Same thing. Keep it there. Keep it in your arm. It gets really strong.
Yeah, that it does. Yeah, yeah. So things like that, if I would have played with the camera more before I bought it, I'm not quite sure I would have done it. But like I said, I love the sensor. I love it for landscape and whatever. It just drives me a little crazy sometimes doing the wildlife.
What Nikons did you end up buying?
I have two 850s.
Oh, you got both the same camera.
Right,
okay.
Right.
Holy hell, I'm just wondering what it costs you in lenses to replace all your lenses.
Well, luckily, being the Tamron ambassador, I was able to swap out.
Or do they swapped them out?
Yeah.
Wow.
So I was lucky when it came down to that part.
To be an overachiever. Because I can't, every time I think about changing, I think, oh my God, I have a lot of gear.
Oh, yeah.
I'm doing this for 20 years.
Right. I
have a lot of nice gear.
Yeah.
Although I did get rid of a lot of it. We had, Naples, Florida is not a big city, right?
Right.
So about 3 or 4 times a year, Isaac from Southern Photo Technical Service comes over here, and he'll clean sensors.
Oh, cool.
That kind of stuff. So he'll do that. Well, one time I had Ed Whitesides from, Use Photo Pro. He came for the whole day too. And I thought, I'm just going to sell all this.
Yeah.
So I did. And then you're like, oh, I wish I would have sold that.
Right. It's always the one thing you sell that you want back.
So one thing you brought up, long exposure noise reduction. Why don't you explain what that is?
So basically what happens when you shoot long exposure noise reduction is you take your, in this case, 4-minute exposure, and then when the long exposure noise reduction goes on, it basically doesn't open the shutter but takes another 4-minute exposure, and then it reads like the pattern of noise of that and subtracts it off your original image. So it takes away that color noise and even other kind of noise that you would get, but it doubles the time period of your exposures. So it is an effective way to remove those red, green, and blue dots on your Canon camera when it's warm, but you have to have the patience to sit there and want to do that, and the time to want to do that.
Do you use that? Or
for nighttime photography, a lot for the stars, you're doing high ISO, and then you'd want the high ISO noise reduction, which isn't quite as time intensive, but again, even 30 seconds, or people will shoot usually up to 30 seconds or even a couple minutes for their night stuff. So the long exposure noise reduction, works well then as well.
So that's a menu setting, right?
Yeah, it's a menu setting.
You turn it on, basically.
Right. You just turn it on.
When you take that 4-minute exposure, it's going to take 8 minutes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So you have to be patient.
Just kind of cleaning up the noise.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So you just have to have time for it to clean up the noise. So, if you're doing stars and stuff at night, it's usually not so bad because when you shoot it, you can have a couple-minute break, and the stars, it's not going to change that drastically or whatever. But when you're doing the clouds, either the cloud patterns can change, or definitely when you're doing it at sunset time, it just meant, one picture, one and done.
Yeah.
And,
Now, what ISO? What I don't know that one. ISO.
so there's high ISO noise reduction too in your cameras, and
So
that's
that's
also just a menu setting. Yeah.
Menu setting.
Yeah, and it's
What
usually
does that
found in
do?
the same menu. It reduces the luminance noise. And I'm not exactly sure how it does that, I think it just takes another fast exposure, but reduces noise using that.
Same type of thing.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Gosh, cameras are so complicated nowadays,
Oh, they're
aren't they?
like supercomputers with lenses on the front. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh,
So I always tell people photography is not rocket science, but your camera is.
it sure is.
Yeah.
That's part of the problem. It's part of the reason, though, that, in my story, the very short version is I started off as a wedding photographer, but then I got into more like high-end portraiture. I kept niching into just like basically newborns.
Right.
And then that business went away like that.
Oh.
And so I was like, oh my God, I'm 50 years old. I don't know what to do. I don't make money. So I started teaching, which I was really nervous to start teaching because I didn't think I was smart enough. But what happens is all these people, this is just giving me a huge audience, how complicated these cameras are, because they don't know that they don't need to know everything in there.
Yeah.
They think they have to learn every single option in there.
Right.
And they're overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And so the first thing I said is, you don't really need to learn all that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I never even heard of ISO. So you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I've been doing this for a long time now.
Right.
I'm teaching for over 10 years. So, but those cameras are complicated.
Oh, yeah.
Fortunately, all you got to do first is just learn exposure and some other things, and you're good enough and then you build from there, right?
Yeah, yeah, and use the ones you need. But the basic principles of photography are all still the same and haven't changed.
Yeah.
Just the equipment's gotten a lot better in a lot of ways.
And but a lot more complicated too.
Right.
All right, what else do I want to ask you? I have more questions here.
Okay.
So, what's a graduated neutral density filter?
So the graduated neutral density filter has, let's say it's a 3-stop filter, it would be 3 stops at the top and gradually taper about halfway through to 0, and then the bottom part's just clear glass. So it's like in Photoshop, if you had a gradient to an image, that's basically what the graduated neutral density filter does. And back when we were shooting film, it was super, super popular to have your graduated neutral density filters because, if you're shooting basically a sky scene and a landscape, the sky is always a couple stops brighter than the landscape. And if you wanted to have any detail in your landscape that wasn't a silhouette, you'd want to expose more for that, and your sky would be underexposed. If you expose for the sky, then your landscape would be underexposed. So you'd put that filter on that would darken the sky by 2 stops, and then gradually, when it got to the horizon line, be clear so that you could balance out that exposure. The problem was when you had a tree sticking up, and then the bottom part of the tree was light, and the dark part, in the sky was dark, kind of thing. But so when you shot it in film, you always had to be conscious of what your composition was when you were using that filter. And then once digital happened, basically you could do that graduated filter in Photoshop, basically, and go around objects and stuff with density masks and luminous masks and that kind of stuff. So it wasn't as necessary to use. Yeah, so they're not quite as prevalent anymore. There are graduated filters that are also tinted, like warming graduated filters and things of that sort. But personally, I haven't carried my graduated filters really since switching to digital.
Yeah, because you can do everything in Photoshop now.
Right, and usually for that high contrast situation, I do a lot of HDR, so I can just bracket 3 exposures and get it much better than I could have doing the filter on there.
Yeah.
So those I pretty much stopped carrying.
What about stacking filters?
Yeah, you can stack. So a lot of people say, well, especially when they start off hearing about the strong neutral density filters, they start off with a 10. Well, a 10-stop filter for that 1/125th of a second, 10 stops gets you to 8 seconds. So 8 seconds is nowhere near 4 minutes, right, or whatever. So they'll say, well, I have a 10 and I've got like a 3 and a 2 and whatever. Can I stack those up to make 15? You can. There's no problem with that. The problem you have to worry about really is if you point into the sun with those, you might get lens flare from just the sun bouncing around between the different layers.
So much glass.
Yeah, it's just reflecting between the different layers of glass. But if you've got the sun behind your back, you can stack with no problem whatsoever.
And do you lose quality at all, or?
Probably a little bit, It depends if they were good filters to begin with and stuff. But yeah, I mean, you could lose a little bit of quality, but
it would be the same if I had a 15-stop filter, if I had
a 10 and a 5.
I would do the same calculations.
Yeah, exactly.
125 would still be 4.5 minutes.
Yeah.
I got that one down.
Right, exactly. There you go. And that's all you have to know.
That's all I have to know.
Right. So when I teach my classes, it's like everybody, you just have to memorize this one thing, And if you
here and simplify the technical.
Oh yeah. And if you want it to be twice as long, you drop your shutter speed to 60. If you want it to go to 2 minutes, you do it so you have a shutter speed of 250. So
it's a much easier way to do it.
Right. You don't have to remember and carry that chart.
Apps like the photographer's ephemeris. I have that, and I was like, oh my god, I need lessons on this app.
Yes, right.
It's hard to use.
Yeah, it is.
I keep talking to Joe. I want him to write a blog article or do.
On that.
I told you he's so smart. He knows everything.
That'd be great.
Him do all the work too.
Yeah.
It doesn't always work.
Yeah, that would be good.
All right. So, what are we know that you like clouds and water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
do you look at the weather patterns to know when you're going to go out, or how does that?
Yeah, that helps. The bad part for me is where I live in California, in the Central Valley, California. I'd say 95% of the time we have bald-headed skies. There aren't clouds. I come here to Florida, and you've got these. That's what Ansel used to call them, bald-headed skies. So here you have these big puffy clouds all the time, and I'm always like, man, and when I come here, it's definitely filter time.
Summer, man, it's amazing here.
Yeah,
summer.
Right. And see,
we don't have too many clouds during the winter.
Right, but see, our summer we have no clouds. Wow. So we can go with no clouds from May through September, without any clouds in the sky. So, when I see those big puffy clouds, I just go running out because it's rare for us to get them. Where here, it's commonplace.
So you're looking for a cloudy day. So
yeah, I'm looking for a cloudy day. And you like the big puffy clouds with blue space between them.
Okay.
Because when you do the long exposure and it's thick clouds, the sky just turns white. Because you're just painting with white all the way across. You don't see the movement.
So you want puffy clouds.
Yeah, the puffy clouds are the best with the blue between them. And it's always best if the clouds are coming towards you or directly away from you, because then you get the long streaks. If it's going sideways, then the clouds are just painting, basically, if there's enough layers, it's just going to paint the sky white.
Oh, see, I
so you want to watch the direction. So if you can line yourself up, find a composition that goes with the clouds going,
How do you, is there a way to know ahead of time?
Which way they're going to blow? Well, you can check wind patterns, but also a lot of times when you check the weather with the wind, it's the ground level wind, and the sky cloud level wind could be that total opposite. So the wind could be blowing in your face on the ground, and the clouds could be moving left to right when you look up.
So you just wing it?
A lot of times you wing, and you just try to find a good. The hardest part is, when you find the good clouds, then you got to find a composition that's going to allow you to try to go, having them coming at you or away from you at the same time. So it makes it trickier because you can have a great, find this great spot that you want to shoot at, and the clouds are going sideways, and you're just going to paint your sky white.
Oh my gosh, see, that is really good. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
So the clouds have to be coming towards you or away from you.
Yeah. So a lot of times here, like when I, on the Delray side, where I spend a lot of time over that way, if I go out to the beach, and I try to go where there's a pier or something that's going to give me something that's static, and then you have the movement, it makes it a little more prominent. Lots of times the clouds are just going up and down the coast, right? So when you're shooting out on the ocean, they're just going to streak across. So you got to try to angle yourself somehow so you're not just shooting out to the ocean. You got to try to find something that is looking a little north or a little south for your composition, so you can get more of the motion. Yeah, right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you need to know wind patterns. You need to have a map so that you can change your position.
Right. Yeah.
So pretty much everything's on your phone nowadays.
So little scouting. So last time I was here, actually, I realized, the clouds were going up and down the beach. So instead of shooting out at the ocean, I went on the beach and basically found like an area where they have like those beach cabana type things and all that, and used that for the foreground. And the people on the beach, and they would streak through if they were most of the people are laying still for the 4 minutes, right? So they're good. And then you have some people that become ghosted because they'll be sitting there for a while and then move or whatever. And then the clouds were going the direction, that I needed to aim, basically. So you always have to think about, which way are they going and what can I use for a foreground.
I'm glad you brought that up because we didn't think of that as a question.
Right.
We didn't know.
Yeah. Yeah. So you learn a lot because, a lot of times you get so excited and you'll do it and you'll sit there for 4 minutes like, oh, I just painted the sky white. That's not so interesting.
No.
So, right.
What else do I not know?
Well, it's interesting because sometimes you look up and it'll look like all the clouds are coming one way to you. And then when you photograph, you'll notice that some of the clouds, even the clouds, will go on 2 different wind patterns. So some of the clouds will come up and some of the clouds will go across. And then you get neat crosshatch type patterns and all kinds of different things go on.
That is so
you end up with that, like those, photographing ghosts like I'm talking about. You don't know what you're going to get till you see it on the back. It's like, oh, wow, the clouds were doing that. You had no idea.
So you could have the wind going to the, let's say, to the east on the ground.
Yeah. Yeah.
The north in the middle and the west up.
Yeah.
So I never even knew that. I don't know that much about weather. I just realized. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. Are there times of year? I mean, here, of course, I guess it depends on where you live.
Yeah, it would depend on where you live,
Where would be the best for? It's the puffy clouds, right?
Yeah, I think Florida is great. Yeah, Florida, it's like that's what.
Come in the summer.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to come here in the summer, and it's fabulous here in the summer.
Yeah, I don't know. I did one summer workshop one time, and I just remember going in the swimming pool and trying to decide if it was hotter in the pool or out of the pool. I remember swimming laps and sweating and thinking, this is not natural. And then a friend of mine took me out into the ocean in the kayak, and it was so hot sitting in the kayaks, and we put our feet in the water, and it's like, well, this isn't any better. It's like sticking your feet in the bathtub.
It's about 90, that's when I go in.
So it's all relative, I guess.
Yeah. When you say 100 degrees, that sounds, I don't think we've ever hit 100. I've lived in Florida most of my life.
Oh, but your 90,
being 100 degrees.
Your 90 is much more miserable than our 100 is.
Really?
Yeah, because of the humidity factor.
I like the humidity. I go to places without humidity and my hair is dry, my skin is dry. I'm like, how can people live here? It's icky. I need some moisture.
So either here or the Pacific Northwest for you, right?
I don't think it's cold there, isn't it?
Yeah, cold and damp.
No, not
Yeah.
cold and damp for me.
Yeah, I just came back from there.
Oh, you did?
We were just photographing eagles up in Washington last week. And yeah.
Those are so beautiful.
Yeah.
Although I forget who said it. I wish I would remember who said that, but eagles are just vultures with good PR.
Yeah, better hairstylists or whatever.
Because we have eagles here,
right,
but we have a lot of vultures here.
Right.
And there was some roadkill out, not right in front of my house, but like one house over. And there were like 10 vultures and 2 eagles in there.
Oh, yeah.
They were just all after the roadkill.
Well, I just posted a picture on my Facebook of, I was leading a tour. We were doing eagles on the Skagit River in Washington. And our last morning was like snow in a blizzard, basically. And we're all bundled up, and you can see the snowflakes coming, and it's piling up on the cameras and whatever. And I posted a picture of us out photographing. And then somebody from Florida wrote, I was just reading that Florida has the largest population of, eagles in the United States or whatever. And I just wrote, what fun would that be?
Is that true?
Yeah, I think so.
Scattered. Go to Washington. It's cold there.
Because they're concentrated.
Oh, yeah. I see pictures, and they're all lots of them.
Yeah.
There's a couple here and a couple here.
Yeah, I mean, we could look up and see 40 or 50 eagles in the trees and stuff.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That's cool.
I also do a trip to Alaska, and we see 2 or 3 times as many of that.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That is really cool. They're just beautiful birds. They're amazing. And they do look good.
They photograph well.
Yes. Snow.
Oh, yeah. I know that was my first time getting them against the snow. Yeah. So that was really cool.
Because here, you could have clutter.
Yeah.
It's hard to get them even in the nests.
Yeah.
There's leaves all around,
Right.
you know?
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so for the long exposure photography, why do we see so many in black and white? What's so good? Why do people change the color?
Well, I do that especially a lot on my daytime, middle of the day shots, because the color really isn't adding to the photograph. You know, they're kind of blue sky and white clouds kind of thing. And it gets a lot more dramatic, I think, looking when you turn it to monochrome.
Okay.
So pretty much, unless I've got something good, colorful in the foreground, or it's the sunset time, those I'll leave in color. But pretty much the rest of them, I usually find I convert to black and white, like them a whole lot better.
Okay.
And I'm a Topaz user when it comes to my conversions. You know, there's all kinds of different software for doing it, but I kind of started out in Topaz and have always stuck with that. And so I use the Topaz black and white effects, and I have this preset that I've made with the sliders the way I like it for, you know, my black and white effects. So I can just go in and click one button and poof, you know, and does all the stuff that right, instant wow.
You know, that's one of the things that's so fun about photography, because how long have you been doing photography? A long time,
yeah,
right?
about 45, 50 years, yeah.
We still get that wow factor on our own pictures where we get so excited.
Yeah, yeah.
We had I did a joint trip to Tuscany, which I'm doing again in October. I hired this guy, because when I go somewhere, I hire somebody, a photographer, to take me around usually, because how do I know where to go?
Exactly.
And so I just thought this guy was great, right? He's such a great photographer, and that's what he does for a living. So he said, let's do a joint thing. We did last year. He was so funny because, you know, of course he's Italian, so it's a little different for us anyway. But he was, you know, there were just 5. We limit our groups to 5, so there are 5 plus the 2 of us, 7 people altogether. So there's lots of time for us to take pictures as well to help the people, because there's 2 instructors, right?
Yeah.
So he's taking pictures, and he just was like, "This is epic!" He was so excited. It was so funny because he's been a professional photographer for over 20 years, you know.
Oh, yeah.
But we get like that. I see that in your face when you're talking about exposing or the black and white. Whoa, you know.
Yeah, and you know, a lot of it's funny because I don't really do too much of my other landscape stuff. There's hardly any that I ever convert to black and white. But it's really just the kind of the cloud stuff that I tend to do that with, and I'm not quite sure why actually. But because usually when I photograph my other normal landscape stuff, I'm again usually photographing early morning or late, and you know, the quality of the light and the color of the light is what's important. And when you're photographing in the middle of the day, you kind of lose that. So like I said, unless it's something in the foreground or whatever that's, you know, the color, like if I were doing autumn leaves, you know, fall color with the streaming clouds, obviously I'd want to leave that in color in the middle of the day. But when it's just, you know, the ocean, or just even, you know, anything that's not real colorful, just the normal green trees and blue water kind of stuff, and it always looks better in black and white.
Okay. That's good. That's interesting. I didn't think about that, but that is a good reason why.
Right.
So now, obviously, you need pretty decent tripod. Do you have recommendations on tripods?
Yeah, I use Faisal.
Okay.
And I've been using Faisal tripods for probably 15 years or more. And I actually met them at the Florida Birding, on St. Augustine, the Florida Birding and photo thing they presented one year. And it was like, wow, I really like that tripod, and got one. And I haven't been using it ever since, basically. And there's lots of good tripods, you know. I mean, Faisal makes good ones, Gitzo makes good ones, Really Right Stuff makes good ones. I just think for the money that they make a really good tripod that's not as expensive as the others and works just as well and lasts as long. But yeah, you want a good, you know, with tripods, people always ask about tripods. And I always say, buy the tripod you can't afford. Because in your lifetime, you're going to have 3 tripods. And it's your 3rd tripod that you buy, that you finally spend the money on. That's the one you're going to keep. And the tripod is the only piece of camera equipment you can buy that can last you your whole photographic career. You're not going to own a camera, a lens, a camera bag, anything that'll last you your whole photographic career, but your tripod will. So I always tell people, you know, if you skip the first 2 and take that money you spent on the first 2 and just buy the one expensive one, you're good for the rest of your life, and you don't have to buy another one. So, you know, the attributes of a good tripod is it's got to be light enough for you to carry, number 1. Because if you're not going to carry it, it doesn't do you any good. and you want it to be tall enough so you don't have to bend over because it's going to hurt your back and you're not going to want to use it. So anything that's light and goes up tall enough for you and supports your gear is a good tripod.
That is good. Okay. What about filters? Do you have favorite brands or?
I use two different brands, and there's a third I'd probably recommend. I use Haida, Haida, and because with my usually with my 15 stop, I shoot a lot with the wide angle lenses because you want as much sky as you can get. So I use Tamron, and I shoot with the Tamron 15 to 30, which has one of those bulbed fronts, so you can't screw filters on.
Oh.
So you have to use the big glass square one or rectangular ones.
Okay.
And Haida makes a really nice one that's real neutral and less expensive than a lot of the others. Okay. And then you got to get this big filter holder, you know, that you have to put on and everything.
Goes on your lens,
it goes on the lens, and with that lens, since the holder can't screw on, it fits over the whole, you know, metal part of the lens, and there's a ring that goes on the back, and you have to screw it on. And so it's a bit of a pain in the butt to use contraption, but once you have it on, then you know you're good to go. And so I use the Haida for the big square ones, and then for my screw-in one, I have a Stingray 15 stop that fits my normal wide angle, like the 24 to 85 wide angle. And then the other brand that I hear good stuff about, I haven't used, but I have some students who have and hear really good things about that's not real expensive, is that Breakthrough photography. Breakthrough photography. Yeah. And they make a really good neutral. So, yeah.
Okay.
And then I just remembered the name of my variable. It's called SLR Magic.
Okay.
And I recommend them for the variable.
And is that the brand name?
Yeah, that's the brand name, SLR Magic. Yeah. And that's the brand name for the variable that doesn't let you go too far.
Okay.
And so you don't get the excess.
Yeah.
And it's real neutral.
I felt so stupid.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, there I am trying to be cheap, right?
Well, I've got a real expensive Stingray variable, and if I spin it too far, I get the excess, So, yeah. So I just like the one that just doesn't allow me to mess up.
But before, I wasn't really even that interested. Because when I started teaching, I thought I was going to be teaching portrait photographers, but that's not who signed up for my classes.
Oh. Interesting.
So it's like, I better learn something about nature photography.
Right.
So I started studying, 10, 11 years ago whenever I started teaching. And I was just, because I get bored so easily, the long exposure photography didn't appeal to me that much, But I thought, well, I should at least try it because all these people are asking me. But now it appeals to, the more you do something, the more interested you get into things sometimes.
Right.
So now that I've been doing nature photography for so long, I'm way more interested.
Yeah.
And then I also see a lot more amazing photography that I want to try to do that.
Yeah, and for me, it was something different to do with the nature photography. I mean, I've been, for 40 years getting up before sunrise and taking pictures of sunrise and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, I just wanted to try something different and got into it. And then it's like, wow, this is so cool.
If you want to be a photographer who sleeps in and doesn't stay up too late, you can do long exposure photography during the day.
Right, or be a wedding photographer because they're always in the evening, and you don't have to get up early in the morning for that.
But midday you can do infrared too.
Right.
I love infrared photography. That's kind of one of my hot points.
Oh, cool.
So what projects do we have coming up for you?
Oh, projects?
Projects, adventures, workshops.
Yeah, workshops and adventures. Well, I just got back, as I mentioned, from doing the Eagles up in Washington. Guess my next big one is to go back and do the Eagles in Alaska in March. And then I do true trips to Alaska every year. I do the Eagles in March, and then I have a bear workshop to Lake Clark National Park in the summertime. And that one, actually, I still have 2 spaces left. So if you go to my website, it is middle of July sometime, I think, this year. I think it's July.
What's the weather like up there in July?
Weather in Alaska can be anything in July. So usually it's
snowing, it could be hot?
Yeah, we've never had snow. Either warm and sunny or 50s and 60s and rainy. It can be anywhere in between that. I always tell people when you go to Alaska, just be prepared to get rained on every day, and then every day doesn't rain is a great day. So if you go with that attitude, when you have a nice day, it's super wonderful, special. But I've been doing the bear trip this will be my 11th year, I think, coming up. And every year it's different. And I mean, you get as close as me to you to bears, and stuff. So it's pretty wonderful. Not anymore.
That's what everybody says to me because I like to hike in the Everglades.
Right.
They're like, are you crazy?
Right.
Alligators out there, yeah.
Yeah.
No, they don't. They leave you alone.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, you're with a guide kind of thing, but it's different because it depends on where you go. I mean, I've gone to Denali National Park and the bears look at you like you're dinner, and you don't want to get anywhere close to being outside with,
Right.
close to a bear. Because, I mean, you can see the look. You are dinner. The coastal brown bears are used to eating fish and grass, basically. They very few mammals that they eat. So they don't even think of you as food source.
Okay.
So it's very different than photographing the inland grizzly bears. But I remember my first time doing it. I have a great story about that if we got a minute.
Yeah.
So the first time, I was used to the Denali bears that look at you like dinner. And I went up to Lake Clark to scout it out to decide whether I wanted to do workshops there. So I just had it was me and a guide, there wasn't anybody else in our group. And they take you out on ATVs pulling trailers basically out to the different locations in the area. So we were out photographing a mama bear and 2 cubs on the beach. And my guide, Brian, looked back up to our vehicle, the ATV with the cart on it, and there were 2 bears coming up towards the cart. And he said, do you mind if I go up? That bear likes to chew on the cushions. And I just want to go up and flip the cushions over and put them under the thing. Are you okay here? I said, yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, I'm okay. And I'm taking pictures and I'm looking through the camera and all of a sudden it's like, there's only one bear, the mama and 1 cub. I wonder where the other one is. And literally, like a cat rubs across the back of your legs, this bear cub rubbed across the back of my legs. And I look up and the mom looks up and I'm like, yeah, you know what? Because everybody tells you don't get between the mom and the bear, and I look up and she looked up at me and then went back down to digging clams. And then after that, I was never nervous again. It's like, it just rubbed across the lens and then it walked back around the mom. And after that, I stopped looking over my shoulder and I wasn't nervous anymore. But that was pretty wild to look down. I mean, it was, only about that tall or whatever, but just rubbed up against me like.
Yeah.
Yep. And they still have claws like, their claws are still 4 or 5 inches long.
As a young animals,
right.
They don't mean to hurt you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Cats
do that all the time.
Yeah.
Little
I've got plenty of scars for my cats,
yeah. They don't mean to.
Right.
They're just playing, but oh my God, it hurts.
Yeah.
Something that size could really hurt you. Oh
yeah.
My God, that's a great story. Oh my gosh.
So, and then let's see what other workshops. I do a trip to a game farm in Montana to photograph wildlife. And it's a great place to practice your wildlife and gain some experience shooting animals and whatever. And I think there's still 2 spaces left on that one.
What is that? What month?
That's in October, very beginning of October this year.
What's the weather like in Montana?
Fall color. No, it'll be probably in the 50s and so fall color.
I didn't know. I had a guy on my show. I had no idea that you can see the Northern Lights in Montana and places.
Yeah.
You
closer in the
or no? On your
October. It's close more in the winter time that you would get to see them there. All that's on my website.
And what's your website?
LewisKemper.com, LewisKemper.com.
So LewisKemper.com.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.
Good.
I'm Peggy Farron. Thanks for joining us on the Understand Photography Show. Come back next week as we talked with Scott Wilson. We're going to talk about photographing wild horses. That's going to be really cool. Remember to check us out at understandphotography.com.